The last few voters are strolling in to cast their vote for the next U.S. president, and we are less than a day or mere hours away from learning who will be the new leader of the free world. Will it be Donald Trump, whom American media describes as controversial, or current Vice President Kamala Harris, who is said to be focused on racially driven policies and not policies for all? Both candidates have policies that have raised questions, but the biggest question for us here at home is, how does this affect the Bahamas? On today's panel, we have former diplomat DeAndra Cartwright and also content creator extraordinaire Peter Deveaux Isaacs Jr., foreign man in a foreign land. Welcome.
Hello.
How are you guys?
Howdy.
I'm good. How are you today?
I am great. I am just ready to find out who will be the president of the United States of America.
You and the entire world is waiting with bated breath to figure this out.
Yeah, literally. And I have to jump right into it because I want to get your opinions on this. DeAndra, let me start with you. In regard to policy, which of the candidates do you think have the better policies that benefit us here at home?
Well, I think, thank you for that question. I think what we need to do is perhaps take a step back and first of all, just start by acknowledging that we've already seen what happens under a Trump administration. So if we were to say he would be building off what was done previously, we've historically seen what that looks like, particularly during the aftermath of Dorian, as well as with COVID and the usual assistance that would have been garnered during that time or the absence of. Then we look at Harris and what she presents, and that's also going to be, or perceived to be, a continuation of what the Biden administration has already begun, topping that off with her policies, her proposed policies that, if you were to take a look at her platform website, are listed out, and some of those are fleshed out very well. I would say that comparing the two of them, I would recommend everybody to go to the outcome document from her visit to the Bahamas. I believe that was last year, in which there are listed quite a few notes that we can all learn from, and we, of course, as a country will be benefiting from. I'm not sure if you want me to go into a few of those, because we want to give our colleague also an opportunity to chime in.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent groundwork that we could lay on. So if I could go off of what the previous administration for Trump has been, I could basically boil down his platform to about 5 different key areas: the economic policies, the immigration policy, healthcare, foreign policy, and climate change. So Trump's economic policy is very much advocating for larger tax cuts, particularly favoring corporations and higher income earners. So if you're an aspiring billionaire, then, you know, of course you might like Trump. But yet again, you should vote in your class, not in what class you hope to be. His immigration policies, that's another one that really affects Bahamians in particular, because we know how much we like to immigrate to Florida. We have a very big population in South Florida also. And Trump's administration prioritizes stringent immigration controls, and including trying to build a border wall. Healthcare, you definitely have to look at the fact that he opposes the Affordable Care Act. I know a lot of folks actually end up having children in Florida, sometimes to take advantage of whatever type of availabilities health-wise that they can. Under Trump, that'll be a little bit more difficult. Foreign policy, he's very much America first. So for Bahamians, you may understand what that means. And of course, climate change, one of the biggest ones actually impacting the Bahamas, because we have the shores right on the side of us, and Mother Nature will reclaim what is theirs. We have to remember that Trump has withdrawn from the Paris Convention and rolled back numerous regulations during his first term as president. Now, Kamala, on the next side, economic policies, she supports progressive tax policies that aim to target higher income earners and higher rates. So therefore, having a more progressive tax that would support the more working class. So the people that do not have as much money or that are in a middle class bracket, they will be able to take advantage of that. Immigration wise, Harris is supporting comprehensive immigration reform that includes a path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants. That's a very big contrast to Trump, of course. So in that case, Bahamians that are trying to find a better way how to get citizenship, they would favor you to go with Harris. Healthcare, of course, supporting, expanding access to healthcare through Medicare for all. So a lot more of, some accommodations being let to the health side by Harris. And foreign policy, definitely more of a Clintonite. I don't know if a lot of y'all remember, but Clinton was very much a rather conservative liberal in the sense that very much still upholding military might. We've seen this with her stance on still trying to protect the military wise. So their borders will be fine. And of course, climate change. Very strong proponent of aggressive measures to combat climate change. So Harris will be actually trying to get back into these conventions and regulations that would help defend us from climate change, which is really important for Bahamians because, of course, we are most affected than that. It
is very important for Bahamians. I took basically a poll to find out exactly what topics would Bahamians be interested about us talking about that really rest heavy on their heart. And one of them was climate change. But aside from the Bahamas, I wanted to also understand, how does other persons in the region feel about this election? And we were afforded the opportunity to speak to Mr. T.K. Peterson. T.K. Peterson is a resident in the U.S. However, he's from the territory U.S. Virgin Islands, where he grew up. And he gave us a bit of insight on exactly, what his thoughts are in terms of, and one thing that he did mention, climate change. And another thing that he did mention is the fact of gender bills and so many other things. But I really want to get into the fact of the point of TK in terms of the climate change, because you guys brought that up so heavily. Now, also for a little bit of background for you and also our viewers, TK is CFO and co-founder of The Gathering Spot. They have clubs in Atlanta, Washington, and LA. Those are the clubs that have a physical building. It's a membership-driven club. And also they have connections in Houston, Charlotte, and throughout the United States of America. They are heavily involved in the community. TK is not only involved in the United States, but also in the U.S. Virgin Islands with the Blend Collective, and he believes in owning your birthright. So we're gonna head to this clip from TK Peterson about climate change.
The reason that I am supportive of the Democratic ticket here and the party is that they have, through their policy and the actions that the party has taken since this administration and before, have been supportive of creating the Virgin Islands and the American lifestyle that I hope to see. They've, passed a major infrastructure bill, has invested hundreds of millions and billions of dollars into our economy for preparing us for climate change, for bringing new businesses and diverse businesses into clean tech energy and into artificial intelligence, invested into the rural areas. This administration alone has invested more billions of dollars into the United States Virgin Islands firsthand.
In May 2023, it was reported in an article that the Biden administration had already pumped over $200 million in that policy that he speaks of. Hearing that come from somebody that is from, of course, an island territory, but also a part of the USA. And I also want to make mention about this with TK. I asked him, why did he say so confidently that he is of the Democratic stance? He says that basically it's not something that he's afraid to say because the policies have benefited persons in the U.S. Virgin Islands and also in the U.S. economy. Tell me your thoughts on that.
I think because we have we're faced with the reality of climate change on a daily basis. This is something that, as Bahamians, is something very near and dear to our hearts because it's our reality. Those of us every one of us has been impacted by some sort of natural disaster. And so knowing where the leaders of the free world, as they call themselves, the potential leader of that country stands on a particular issue is incredibly important. When we hear from a potential leader the uncertainty of whether climate change is real or not, that can be quite shocking, right? And when we look at what his opponent, Vice President Harris, has said about her positioning on climate change, as well as emphatically what she has proposed that they do to not only assist the Bahamas, but the wider Caribbean. I think we need to be paying more attention to that. And she's outlined this in several ways. Again, I would encourage everyone to really look at the outcome of her visit here with Caribbean leaders last year. And then one of those things that she spoke about was the U.S. Caribbean partnership to address the climate crisis. They call it PAC 2030, and really look at what they're targeting in that, which covers disaster risk reduction, is talking about the operationalization of climate resilience and initiatives to support that. It's talking about the Caribbean Climate Investment Program. We're not hearing this from the Trump campaign. We're actually hearing something that would put us in a more difficult position than we already are.
DeAndra, I wanna go into this because I don't want to make this seem like we are very not Trump to say in plain terms, because I want to give both presidential candidates, us the opportunity to analyze all of their policies very thoroughly. And I want to speak to you, DeAndra, in regards to something that also came up very frequently in my polling, and that was the whole women's rights situation and the abortions law. And I will be completely frank and honest, because I told y'all we are going to be authentic on the show. There are a lot of women that seek to go to the U.S. when they are pregnant for care. Also, too, there is an unspoken thing that happens where women, when they have an unwanted pregnancy, it's not legal here, so they go over to the USA and they handle their business. Given those two scenarios, I gave two scenarios that one might see as very cynical, and the other also, of course, is about a woman's health. Given those two scenarios, what are your opinions on the whole discussion surrounding women's health and rights?
So just to be clear, we're talking about women's health and rights here in the Bahamas, or those in the United States of America?
So what we're talking about is the fact that people have said under President Trump that, of course, women's health will be under danger, as well as women's rights will also be under danger.
So the reality is that under Trump, it's not going to happen. It's already happening. If we look at what happened with Roe versus Wade and the Supreme Court striking that down, what exactly that means. And that's also a decision I would recommend anybody to actually go and read on that, because that was some very intense legal work that went into that particular decision in that case. But we also saw where it divested, not only through that particular decision, but through others, that allowed the states themselves to decide what a woman can do with her body. So your example to say that, Bahamians sometimes go to the US of A to seek medical care or whatnot, that it depends right now on which state you go to. If you can actually be eligible for that health care, no matter what it may be, actually, because it's not just for abortion, it's for other things, other services that you may wish to get. I mean, even trying to obtain birth control may also be policed to different extents going through the states. And you had noted that in our own country that it may be illegal, but I mean, technically it's on the books and it's legal. It is legal for those who it is determined to be needed, right? So medical needs, whatnot. I think, and this is something I said before, we pay so much attention to American politics that I don't think we place that same level on Bahamian politics, where we're asking, what about the policies? What about the legislation? What about the things that impact us? Because if it is that we know that all these different changes are happening for women's care and women's rights inside the United States of America, are we asking the same questions, or are there enough persons asking the same questions here in the Bahamas? Because what they say is true. When the US of A catches the flu, then we start to sneeze, right? And when you see certain mindsets become even more entrenched, it's concerning, because and I'm sure we all know that while some persons may not verbalize their position on women's rights, there are still persons in the Bahamas that may not consider women as equal to men, and whereas women may not have the opportunity to do what they would like with their own bodies, which is why some persons may say that that's why our laws have not been revamped in the way that they should be. But do we have enough persons that are talking about this? Are these options that we need available to us? And the God honest truth is, we look towards other countries to do trend analyses. We try to look at what's offered in other countries, and then we tend to mirror that as in best practices. But what we're seeing right now in the United States of America is not necessarily the best practice when it comes to women's health. But are we looking at what's going on here in the Bahamas? Not enough people are.
Absolutely, I agree with you. I think that we've spent, and I'm going to take this home now in terms of women's rights, I think that we've spent a lot of time focusing on basically what the U.S. is doing, and not enough time in equipping ourselves with the information and the knowledge that we need to push for better conditions for women here in the Bahamas. I can go on about a list of things. One of the things that I'm passionate about is the fact that a lot of women from the Family Islands have to come into Nassau just to give birth. And that's alarming, very, very much alarming. So I agree with your point, DeAndra. I think that we do need to spend more time thinking about what's happening here at home, and then think about our neighbors. Secondly, Peter, I don't want to throw that question on you, but women's rights, because I want you, people is well, he's a man. But what I will...
But Danielle, that's actually a very important point, because a woman's fight is not only a woman's fight. It takes the men to assist us. When we actually talk about gender rights, we say that it cannot be done for women and girls without the help and support of men and boys, because the reality is we're not the only ones fighting this. We're not the ones that put into place the systems that we're fighting against. So we need the men to be able to speak up more, to speak up in support of us. So yes, we would need Peter to talk.
Oh, she threw you in the seat. She threw you in the seat, Peter. Let me ask this question.
I'll sit the seat gladly. Patriarchy has no gender. Bell hooks. I mean, essentially, I definitely welcome the response. Essentially, that in 4K, you will never catch me making any type of grandiose statements pertaining to bodily autonomy for women and femmes. However, this isn't only simply a matter of women and femmes being able to exercise their right. This is a matter of the fact that this election in particular, I'll take it to a larger scale, is indicative of more so democracy in itself. What is actually on trial here with this election, apart from, as DeAndra just brought up, Roe v. Wade being overturned, Trump's plan has absolutely and emphatically been to evade justice and circumvent justice at every given state, at every given chance. He's evading justice as we speak. His way into the White House is by him evading justice. And his tactic, more times than not, is to stack the Supreme Court. And when you do things like that, you can actually change irrevocably for years to come, because that is not in a position that you could just vote out. These are non-political positions that you will then have to deal with the ramifications of for quite some time. So when we discuss something as crucial as women's rights and Trump's way in stacking the courts and able to get what he wants, and when he says things about you only need to vote this one time, this isn't allegedly, I could say this with full throatedly, he has said this is the last time that you will need to vote, and that's because he understands stacking the courts can change the way that the U.S. democracy works. So beyond that, the women's rights is a microcosm and is symbolic of freedom in the United States. And I understand also that we focus far too much on U.S. politics. However, as we all noted, the way that the U.S. trends has a lot of different effects, from economic change, from import taxes, and also, of course, the fact that we are so close to their shores. We have a whole U.S. embassy being built that dwarfs the majority of downtown as we speak. To ignore the presence of the U.S. and their influence and their seminal influence on us would be irresponsible. So the question then is, in that case, do you want someone in office who has, over time, at every given moment, tried their best to evade justice, literally being impeached twice? Or do you want, which is a rather conservative liberal of a potential president hopeful? And that's not to let Harris off the hook. A lot of her different policies are much an echo of Biden's era. And in fact, she doesn't equivocate with this. She's not trying to lie to you with that. She tells you that she holds a gun and she will shoot someone that comes into her house. That's not someone that a progressive stance would take. She knows exactly what she is. Not even like Obama, which was a little bit more charismatic and a little bit more graceful with the way that he communicates his plans. No, Harris is very much straight up, in my book, a Clintonite. So it's really a decision between a far-right presidential hopeful, one that we already know very well what he is capable of, and a right-of-center presidential hopeful, who we have yet to see.
Okay, but Peter, thank you for that. Thank you for that also, too. Peter, a lot of persons might argue at the fact that not all of his policies are all bad, that he has some good. And he also touts that the economy was stable when he was president of the United States. I see you sipping your water.
Yeah, no, I try to stay hydrated before when I call out stuff. Of course, a lot of the times, single issue voting, because that's essentially what you're talking about. When people say, well, not all of it is bad, and we have to look at the totality of the platform. Single issue voting is a very dangerous thing because we do not exist as single issues. We exist in a society of which they're all interconnected. And one issue, and saying that I just want Trump because of this one issue, ignores and very irresponsibly ignores the breadth and the totality of the collective issues that platform stands on. You're not only voting for Trump, but you're voting for an agenda. You're voting on a Project 2025. You're voting on particular tenements and statements of that policy, that if you like one of Trump's things, you have to also be willing to accept DeSantis's different agendas. You have to be willing to accept Robert Kennedy Jr. being the leader when it comes to women's health. Literally, this is a promise that he's made. You have to take into account all of the different things that Trump, not only Trump, but a Trump White House will bring with him. So when people talk about, well, not all of the policies are bad, no, but is the platform bad? Okay, then one green apple or one good apple inside a very gangrene bunch doesn't necessarily help me, because I'll miss and eat one of the bad apples and die before I get to the good one.
Another thing that former President Trump touts about is the fact that how well they handled COVID-19. And in the during the COVID-19 pandemic, something major happened, and that was the movement Black Lives Mattered. We saw persons march in the street, the issue of George Floyd, his passing. All of those things were happening under his presidency. And a lot of times here in the Bahamas, we tend to question, well, what did that have to do with me? And I asked around, and a lot of persons feel as though, even though I may be Black, I'm from the Caribbean. So when I do visit the United States, I don't encounter the issues that you guys have. Some people feel that we may, some people feel that we may not. But again, from this regional perspective, here's TK Peterson in regards to that, on how we're viewed as Caribbeans when we go over to the US.
That being Caribbean exempted me from racial discrimination? I have not. There is true cultural differences between being an African American individual and being someone from a Caribbean island, and that I think similar to, there's a difference between someone being from Connecticut versus being from Texas. There's cultural differences. But when it comes to racial discrimination, we're talking about skin tone and color. They look at me as they see a Black man. I identify as a Black man. I'm proud to be a Black man. And I've had the full American experience related to being a Black citizen in this land,
Peter, you have lived in the United States under a Democratic administration and also a Republican administration. Can you tell me exactly what was your experience being in a foreign man in a foreign land?
Exactly, and actually in tandem with that, with the Trump presidency, he's many times flirted with the idea of making sure that birthright citizenship, one that I have, of course, gotten my citizenship from. I just happened to be born in New York. And that's the reason why I do hold American citizenship. He has flirted with the idea, not allegedly, this is well documented, flirted with the idea of making sure that that is not a thing anymore. Of course, he has a whole constitution in his way, but yet again, when you come with the Supreme Court and like the different ways that those are stacked against you, anything is possible. Now, as it pertains to being a black man, and given that I have a Caribbean spawn point or a Caribbean heritage, and walking in America still as a black man, what my colleague earlier said rings true. Of course, people do not see the fact that you are from the Bahamas. There's no Bahamian flag that someone is going to see pop over my head before police would have stopped me in a routine traffic stop and put my whole chest in front of a Honda hood. It does not matter. He's not going to care about my accent or the fact that I have a Bahamian heritage before whatever befalls the majority of Black Americans, especially Black American men in the United States. And I think that Bahamians unfortunately revel and take pride in this idea that we live in this Black nation, and that means that we don't have the hang-ups of what it is to be a Black American. Having lived in America as a Black man for 10 years, I can very much say that we are blessed to be in a Black nation. Despite that, we still do deal with a lot of different ways that white supremacy permeates through our society, and we don't even realize it. We talk about mango skin quite a bit, and the way that we treat mango skin gals versus dark skin gals, that rings true. And even though they're not white people, that is still a manifestation of the way the white supremacy works in a Black nation. We are not exempt from the racism that the United States has, especially given that we're right on their shores, just because we live in the Bahamas. And to say that we don't is unfortunately misguided, but I'd also love to hear what DeAndra would have to say about that as well.
No, I think everything you said rings true when you are abroad, because I've had several conversations before, but I think my racial ambiguity gives me a very unique perception when I travel abroad. But I do see what my colleagues go through, my friends go through immediately. For instance, if my friend who sees herself or is seen as more Black than I am, and I identify as a mixed person, I am a Black woman, I just, I'm a bit bright, right? I'm seen as Latina.
Wow.
That's a good thing that I actually speak Spanish, because I literally will be approached when I go to the United States of America, and this is tried and true no matter which state I am in, where persons will approach me, they will speak Spanish. It literally just happened to me on Sunday here in my own country, where I was approached and spoken to in Spanish, right? So my reality is a bit different. But then, depending on where you go in the US of A, the environment as well, there have been places where I've been seen as Jewish, where I've been seen as white, where I've been seen as so many different things. It's crazy. But once you are othered, and I think this is the point, a part of the point we're trying to make here. Once you are othered in a particular land, that experience, it doesn't matter where you're from, because being othered, and this is a sociological a term that I would also encourage persons to look at, we don't necessarily experience that here as Bahamians, but other people do in our country. So it really depends on how you're related, meaning to these events and whatnot. But what you had said earlier was quite, I think, important. It doesn't matter where you're from, it's how you present. And then that determines how you will be treated, honestly. And again, like I said, I've felt this, I have seen this. And we've tried it before in some, anecdotal sociological experiments, some friends and I, when I was abroad, where the two of us would enter a store. And then we would see the difference in treatment immediately. I am not followed by anybody, but my friend is followed by someone just by the virtue of her being darker than I. It's ridiculous. And if we were to say that, because you're from the Caribbean, that doesn't negate the fact that you will be treated poorly because of the color of your skin, which isn't something that you can change. But then it goes back again to the othering, because that same concept, I think, happens with persons who are of Latin cultural backgrounds, island cultural backgrounds, and things like that. But that doesn't preclude mistreatment. It really doesn't. You're going to get mistreated because of a different reason, but the first and foremost will be your racial perception.
I want to make this very, very straightforward and very clear. Are you guys under the opinion that racial discrimination happens heavily depending on the administration?
Yes. And it's verbalized. I really want to say that it's verbalized. It's almost, if we create an environment where certain persons feel empowered to act in particular ways, then their true essence will come to the forefront. It will, because they feel empowered to do so, that they know that there's not going to be any repercussions, or if there are, they're going to be minimalized, or they will be celebrated for it. Again, I think Pete and I could both give you examples of our own experiences, either for ourselves or with others, while being abroad. I recall the night of the election, being in the US of A at the time, and some of the language that was being uttered around, and again, it goes back to racial perceptions. What was being said, I'm like, how do you feel comfortable saying this out loud, right? But then when you take a step back, you look at it psychologically, you look at it sociologically, it's just that this is how some persons truly, they think it's okay because that's how they've been brought up, or how they've been sensitized, is how they've been socialized. And then they may not either wish to change or they don't want to change. I would say yes, it depends.
I want to play devil's advocate here. And with me playing devil's advocate, I want to bring up President Donald Trump with the borders and, of course, immigration. He stated that one of his policies would be mass deportation. He's even gone as far as to one of his rallies, he played a video from someone whose daughter was murdered, and the person said that their daughter was murdered because of Kamala's policies when it came to immigrants, illegal immigrants, because the persons that murdered her daughter was illegal immigrants. Of course, my sympathies goes out to that mother. And then, of course, you have Candace Owens, who has accused Kamala of, and these are not her exact words, playing blackface. And pretending to be our black grandmothers. And she's also been accused of discrimination due to her policy, again, that seems to be a black man's agenda, that is laying out basically that they will give out loans up to $20,000 to black men. What are your thoughts on that?
So I can't, where do you start? So essentially, Trump's entire platform isn't much of a platform in many different ways. A lot of it is just strung together rhetoric, a lot of inflammatory statements, which has worked pretty well for him. I mean, it got him into the White House. And I don't think that Trump himself is the problem. I think Trump is a branch of a gangrened root. I think that Trump is indicative of an America that is coming to, as Malcolm X would say, the chickens are coming home to roost. This is being laid a foundation from quite some time. And that reality is America is a country built upon slave labor, people that look like you and I, having America built on the backs to cultivate the land and make it into the hegemon that it is now, and that, at a global stage is now somewhat dwindling. So the remarks of which Kamala playing blackface, I'm not sure exactly what Candace Owens has said. I have spoken myself to Candace Owens in a YouTube capacity, and our conversations have been interesting nonetheless. However, what I can definitely say unambiguously is that Kamala Harris is a woman of color. Regardless if you want to impugn her blackness or, where her blackness resides from, I think would just be pedantic. I think that you have essentially a woman of color running for the highest office in the hegemon of the Western world. And that does mean something, and that does communicate quite a bit. And as DeAndra was saying earlier, the environment that you breed provides particular rule sets and behaviors. So when a person who is accused of sexual assault, who has literally paid hush money in figures that we would not even be able to imagine, simply to keep someone quiet, whose victims have come out against them, who has also said racial calumnies, who has also equivocated justice. When that person is given the keys to the Oval Office, you are saying something as a demographic,
Peter,
and basically saying,
you mentioned DeAndra. You mentioned DeAndra, and I have to get this point, DeAndra, because she does have to slip out from us for a moment. But I really want to hound down DeAndra on basically Kamala making this policy that they call the Black Man Agenda that is geared towards this particular grouping. In your opinion, do you think that is discrimination?
So the base of that question, I think, sounds like something that we've heard before from many other persons, but it also is linked to what has been subsequently removed in many instances in which it occurs, which is affirmative action. But then further to it, if we take a step back, and I like to be objective, we take a step back and we look at the groupings of persons, and we look at the genders within those persons, those groupings of persons, and how they have been treated. It's almost like, how do you provide not just equality, but equity? And the importance of, fostering that and supporting that. Some could say that it is discrimination, but if you were to make such a statement, then are you truly accurate in what you say when you do not acknowledge the historical context and the circumstances that would have afforded the trajectory as to how those persons actually got there in the first place? We would want to see equality fostered wherever it can be, and if it takes certain measures to get there, then I'm trying to understand why that would be an issue, particularly when some of those programs would have been in place before. Now, what I would say as a former diplomat and also trying to be objective is that you would want to have, if you're going to have a particular program for a particular subset of persons, you would want to see that for all persons, but tailored within a particular context. Because the reality that I face within my cultural context, within my gender context, within my socioeconomic context is completely different than somebody else. So how are we able to afford that same opportunity across the board? Again, I cannot say that would be discrimination, but I can see how some persons would try to say that it is. But yes, and thank you so much for allowing me to say that. I must leave right now. This has been brilliant. And I thank you again.
Thank you so much, DeAndra. You've been great. You've provided incredible insight, and we hope to do this again for our elections, because of course we'll be on top of that as well here at Our News.
Happy to have that opportunity whenever it comes across my desk.
Yes.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. Peter, my foreign man in a foreign land. DeAndra made a good point, and that was, I don't want to say her words. I'm not going to say this in her words, but what I got from what she said was the fact that Black men have suffered a lot in the United States. And what that policy basically does, it equips them with some sort of capital to start businesses. I don't know if you've seen the Black Man, what they say the Black Man Agenda plan is. Have you seen it?
I haven't seen that verbatim, but I've heard different instances. It isn't new. The gendering of it isn't. It might be applicable, but it isn't necessarily a new thing. And basically, my retort to that essentially would be that what looks like special treatment after years, decades of subjugation is actually, I know it's a loaded term, but reparations is actually restoration to a neutrality. If a race has been going on and other races, other contestants in that race have already made about a lap around the course, and this one person hasn't even began running yet, it wouldn't be a fair race to even now allow us all to run at the same speed, even because that person has already been around the lap once. So essentially what this is trying to establish some restoration to a particular group that has been disenfranchised for quite some time. And that bill or that proposal has many different iterances for Black men, for Black women, for different marginalized groups like disabled groups like the Native Americans. There's a bunch of different iterances which are specifically looking at affording some type of restoration to particular groups that have historically been disenfranchised.
About that, I think people really don't understand and I want to be very politically correct about this because I'm the host. But it's like I said earlier, Black men have suffered a lot, not just in the United States, but also here in the Bahamas as well. We tend to forget that segregation was also a thing here in the Bahamas. And we do also have an issue where there's a lack of access to capital for a lot of young men due to us not having a long history and a long standing of being in this Western world. And that's what drives me to my second point as we wait for our second guest to enter into the room. Oh, I'm doubling it up on you now, Peter. But immigration, President Trump has also promised mass deportation. Do you think that is realistic in 2024?
Realistic as far as execution, or realistic as, okay, if he can very well do it, I'm sure he could do whatever he wants to put his mind to varying degrees of success. He, of course, we've seen what he has done as far as just like in Hurricane Dorian, to bring it closer to home, his refusal and his treatment of people seeking asylum with Bahamian ancestry. We've also seen what he has done in particular to Haitian immigrants who have risked a lot simply to get onto the shores of the United States, only to be chased on horseback or in some outrageous cases, even beyond Trump's administration, to die in Guantanamo Bay. There's a long bipartisan, also, if you want to talk about impartiality, there's a bipartisan effort to make sure that the migrant, especially the Black migrant in particular that is going to the United States, has a very, very unclement time, to say the least. If not, doesn't make it. That is a very bipartisan effort, whether it be the Trump administration or a potential Harris administration. The migrant is going to have a difficult time. And to also just put it bipartisanly, when we advocate for any of these people, whether it be Trump or Harris, we're not doing that, or at least I would not be doing that excitedly. I'm more so negotiating the terms of which we organize our actual political efforts under. And I'm wondering who would be easier to do that. Will it be easier for me to mobily, politically activate people under a Harris campaign or a Trump campaign? It's not that I'm excited to do either of them.
Heard that, Peter. We have our second person entering the room, and he is going to give us great insight. It is Senator Barry Griffin. And once we get Senator on the screen, Peter, I want to first start with you because I really want to dive into it. Hi, Barry. How are you, Senator?
What's happening?
I'm good, thank you. How are you? Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here, Senator. And I was just about to pose this question to Peter, but let me start with you because the foreign man has given us such great insight so far. And DeAndra Cartwright was on with us earlier. But Barry, I want to ask you, both presidential candidates has been accused of discrimination. One side is definitely more, so I don't know what's the correct terminology right now in this instance, all-American, and the other one has been accused of being so pro-Black that she's trying to use her ethnicity to push herself within those communities. Senator, what are your thoughts on that?
I had to laugh a little bit in you saying that. But, you know, being in politics, I understand that during election time, things are very hot, things are very heated. You throw the kitchen sink, so to speak, at your opponent and you kind of see what sticks. But I think, you know, the average voter or the average man would see the long list of accusations against Trump from the time that he was a businessman, in terms of discrimination leading into his political career. And I think it's well known that the Democrats are always accused of playing identity politics, whether it's being a woman or being black, Barack Obama, Kamala Harris. And so these are things that both parties have long thrown at each other. And again, it's going to be up to the American people to sort of decipher between fact and fiction. But I agree with you. This is something that, the folks behind these campaigns level against each other in order to attain an advantage. Well, you say we're racist. Well, we're going to say you're racist in the exact opposite direction. And, that's politics.
Peter, let me ask you, do you think the Dems play identity games?
Absolutely. I want to say that the Democrats isn't the entirety of the left spectrum. In the United States, the political spectrum, of course, right to left, right being more conservative and left being more progressive. Progressive is in alignment with particular policies that are more so in favoring the working class, and conservatives are more so favoring richer, whiter people. And the Democrats sit somewhat in the middle, if I can say so myself, the majority of the party. They're consensus makers. They uphold the status quo. So definitely, as the senator said, in politics, war is hell. And they are trying to find different ways of which to brand particular candidates to their detriment. And Trump was excellent at that. We remember Sleepy Joe. We remember so many quotables that Trump was able to make and stick. And keep in mind, Trump is an entertainer. But as the senator also said, Trump has accumulated quite a bit of different calumnies and allegations and just indictments on not only his character, but his business acumen. Trump cannot withdraw from a bank in NYC right now from a loan. That's not accusations. That Trump cannot get a loan right now in the United States. His business acumen has always been put into question. One of Trump's rise to fame is his way of dealing with the Brooklyn Five, and in particular dealing with black youths in the United States. He said black jobs in reference to particular black people in the United States. He's called Latino people rapists and criminals that are bringing drugs. Just recently, he said that Haitians are eating dogs. I mean, this is kind of laughable at a particular point beyond parody. And I think it more so is a commentary on the state of affairs in American politics, where this is actually something. And it also says something that, especially for the women out here listening right now, there are people that are actually debating upon a level playing field between a decorated woman prosecutor, someone that has absolutely in much service to our own country, of course has problems, but a lot of service to our own country, and someone that is literally a felon and that has a CVS list, not no supervalue list, a CVS list receipt of allegations and indictments and numerous parts, and it's currently pending. If he does not get into office right now, it's currently pending trial, and God knows where that'll happen. And that's to tell you that those people are equal in the eyes of some American voters. That woman and Donald Trump are equal, and that tells you exactly how a woman of color is seen in the United States.
I want to have a little fun here, and I want to be devil's advocate again. I want to ask this question. Do you think Donald Trump is a representation of everything that a lot of people are afraid to say?
Do you want to handle that one, Senator?
Can you repeat the question? Do we think Donald Trump is a representation of...
A lot of things people are afraid to say.
I do. And so I often tell people in politics, you win people in one or two ways. You can win people by your aspirational message, by being, spreading words of hope and love. And then you have the Martin Luther Kings and the Barack Obamas who do that. And then you have people who win politics because of being pessimistic, and name any dictator around the world who's, overseeing atrocities. And those are two legitimate ways that people throughout history have won people over and attained their vote. And so in terms of Donald Trump, he's reaching into that sort of pessimistic, unhopeful sort of part of clearly that exists in the American psyche, because no matter what you say, he has his followers. He is on the precipice of possibly becoming the president of the United States for a second time. And so there's that sort of lingering spirit somewhere within the American psyche that he is appealing to. And so I do think he is speaking to the parts of people that we don't necessarily want to glamorize or put on the screen, but it's there. Clearly there is a great faction of American people who believe in his anti-immigration policies, who believe that a woman should not be the president of the United States. And so these things are there. And so I do believe he is speaking to those people or those parts of people.
Absolutely. And the thing is, you can say whatever you want to say about Donald Trump, but I agree, he does have his followers. And this is not a political or presidential, race that is so far-fetched. The last time I checked the numbers, it's pretty tight. The polls are pretty tight. Now, Peter, I know you have a thesis on that. I heard you on the record about Elon Musk and X. But even when I scroll through TikTok, I don't see that there's so many people that are so hard against Trump, so to say. I've seen people that said they're not interested in voting more so. And one thing that you cannot disagree with is Trump definitely screams from the high heavens everything that he's done or everything that people would say that he think he's done. And one of those things that he says that he will do and he has done in his presidential run is he's prevented war. He said that he's prevented war, and he said that in his policies that he will not allow World War III to break out, considering all that is going on in the Eastern with Israel and Hamas. What are your thoughts on him? Let me start with you, Peter. What are your thoughts on him saying that I am going to be the one that will prevent World War III?
Under Trump's administration, war and bloodshed has existed. But I wouldn't, to his benefit, it's not that cut and dry. It's not that black and white. Presidents always inherit wars. They preside over wars. Obama shoots drone bombed more people than I have fingers for. So I mean, this isn't yet again like a partisan issue. This isn't a Republican and Democrat thing. This is an American thing. America has over time, throughout its imperial history, been the big brother that has had their hands in many different intimacy and bloodsheds. Of course, a lot of people talk about the French occupation of Haiti. Nobody talks about the way that America also occupied Haiti and also did, just as much damage. And the question if there will be a World War III under a Trump administration right now, as it pertains to, to his benefit, I know you're playing devil's advocate. A lot of people wince at particularly Trump's foreign policy, not because of some adeptitude or because he's playing 4D chess like a lot of people say, but simply because he's a wild card. And he's demonstrated himself to be so unpredictable that he can very well, if his emotions have it, do this at the stroke of a button. And that makes a lot of world leaders very wary, and then they're therefore a little bit more tempered when they're dealing with how they are going to militarily engage with the United States, because the United States is known to have a military budget and a defense budget that dwarfs entire country's GDP. I mean, like the United States is a military might, and this isn't just Trump. This is also Harris also said that she will make sure that the United States stays one of the biggest military, boasting the biggest military country in the Western Hemisphere. So if this promise that there will be no World War III under a Trump administration, I don't necessarily have much credence in that promise. I mean, he promised a border wall, and you see that the border wall isn't done. He's promised quite a bit of things. And yet again, I think that Trump is someone that will say what needs to be said in order to get what needs to be got. He's a brilliant salesman and a brilliant spokesperson, or he likes to say things very quickly in order to get himself out of precarious situations. So I can't necessarily be sure if he would actually do that.
Yeah, I was playing devil's advocate completely.
I know.
I was. And I want to bring this back home because a lot of people, that was not in my poll. People, nowhere was Bahamians telling me they were thinking about war. They were thinking about immigration, women's health, women's rights. However, war affects all of us. So I had to throw that question in there and, be a little devil's advocate, because when I was reading through his policies, I was like, hold on now, you can stop World War III, all right? But one question that did come up, and this was a topic of conversation not only here in the Bahamas, but also in the U.S. as well, so much that BET hosted a panel on it, and Pastor Jamal Bryant made reference to it, and that is the fact that Black men seem to have an issue with women in leadership. So, gentlemen, I got a clip from T.K. Peterson in regard to this. He is, again, in Atlanta, and he is involved in the community, not only in America, but also the U.S. Virgin Islands. So let's hear what TK had to say about that question.
I think there's a contingent and strain of us in the diaspora and the male populace overall who, due to patriarchy, misogyny, whatever category you want to have it, there's a outright push away from female leadership. But I will also say, in being from the U.S. Virgin Islands, we are a matriarchal society where, a lot of our heroes and cultural icons are women. One of the most significant cultural moments in our history is the 1878 fire burn, which was a contract dispute from the recently freed enslaved individuals related to their work on a plantation. That was led by 4 queens, as we call.
Senator Barry Griffin, in your humble opinion, do you think that Black men in the diaspora do not support Black women in leadership?
So I think it's a complicated answer to that question. I think there are definitely parts of the diaspora, many segments of Black men who do not support women in leadership, and that's for many reasons. And so I do think some of the reluctance of Black men in America to support Kamala Harris has a lot to do with that. The machismo that exists in Black culture, and it's not just in Black culture; it's also in other cultures around the world. And so I do think there's an element there. But the gentleman that you just played the clip from, I am glad that he mentioned that in the U.S. Virgin Islands, it's a matriarchal society. I wouldn't say that about the Bahamas, but I would say anyone who lives in the Bahamas knows and understands that most families in the Bahamas are led by women. Most workplaces are led by women. So in the Bahamas, we are used to seeing women in powerful positions, women in leadership positions. And so I think that there are countries around the world that have diaspora in the United States that are quite comfortable seeing women in leadership. But even with that said, I think just as a world, we're still very patriarchal. And so I do think that there are segments of the Black male population in particular who can't envision or don't want to envision a woman leading the most powerful nation in the world. And that's something that we're going to have to contend with, because even though we see our mothers leading homes and businesses and organizations, there's still something that's being taught to Black men to say that, only men should lead or be the head of the household, so to speak. And so I definitely, in watching the discourse on social media in particular, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and seeing what Black men have to say, whether it's said vocally or verbally or not, there still is that undercurrent of machismo in that, there should be some sort of aspirational male figure to lead. And I would use the comparison not between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, but between Kamala Harris and Barack Obama. There was a lot of male support for Barack Obama in his run for the presidency. And so we even see that it's not just a thing about color or race. So we see that, sex does have a huge part in the way people see their leaders or want to see their leaders.
Yeah, and to add to that, I definitely would also look at the fact that we have figures like Mia Mottley in Barbados, the Prime Minister, that is a very, very much strong, betraying many different Caribbean norms as a openly queer and black female leader that leads absolutely valiantly. The Caribbean, as the senator said, is definitely variegated. We have like a lot of different examples of experiences here. In the Bahamas in particular, you do have an enclave of men that sometimes almost use divine calling to basically say that a man should be the one in charge of a household and lead in particular ways. And women genuflect to that. Women also subscribe to religious understandings of gender roles and who should be in the driving seat and who should be in the passenger. And of course, that is absolutely fine. But if you want to subscribe to a gender role in line with your religious values and your moral values, then so be it. There's nobody going to get into your house and change the way that happens. But we also have to look at the fact, as we said, that there are women in our own society on a regular basis. Dame Marguerite, of course, Mother Pratt. There are so many women that we could look to today, right now, not in our past, but right now that live today, that are bastions of Bahamian matriarchal might. And despite that, we still have a reluctancy to seeing women in leadership positions or listening to women tell us men what to do. And that is absolutely indebted to our own socialization and has absolutely nothing biologically to say that a woman cannot lead, because they have shown us time and time again, whether it be in office or someone as simple as your own ma running your own house. Mm-hmm. We've seen it and we know it, and our refusal to recognize it is more so to massage our own egos than in their actual adeptitude at being leaders.
Absolutely. And this election in the United States is a very crucial one, very, very pivotal. It's 2024. And we're looking at a gentleman that was a former president. He's been charged with some crimes. We're also looking at potentially the first female to be elected as the president of the United States. All in all, though, we are next to them, right next door. And we tend to say when a certain political party is in the United States, I will say this, that we benefit more. Senator, do you think that depending on which party is in, it would have grave effects on the Bahamas?
So I'm going to be very careful in my response because I'm not speaking for the government of the Bahamas here.
Okay, hold on. Let me pull back. Barry Griffin. Let me leave off the senator. Yes. Barry Griffin. Yes. Do you think that depending on what would happen with us? Like, what would the Bahamas look like under a Republican government or under a Democratic government?
So here's the thing, and I'm also going to lean on my experience as an attorney in the financial services world. As we know, our economy is largely tourism and financial services. And so any policies that the U.S. would implement that would affect any of those industries would largely affect the Bahamas. And so as someone who's worked in the financial services industry, I would say that generally speaking, the thought is that when Republican presidents are, when Republican legislators lead Congress in the United States, the Bahamas benefits because they tend to take a more laissez-faire approach to regulation of the financial markets and the regulation and oversight of international financial centers. And so there tends to be a little bit more freedom in international financial centers. So I would give one example. Under the last Democratic regime before Joe Biden, which is Barack Obama, they instituted FATCA, which is basically a behemoth of an act that requires financial centers around the world to comply with very stringent compliance initiatives that are targeted towards the offshore world. At a similar time, the EU would have implemented serious similar measures. And so under that Democratic president, it was more sort of strict. And so a lot of the things that we're seeing in the country now, where it takes longer to open a bank account because of all the verifications that need to happen, the documentation and all of that. Those would have come largely from international obligations from the EU and the United States. And so from that perspective, I would say our financial services, regime in the Bahamas tends to be more affected in that way when Democrats sort of lead. And when Republicans lead, you would see that, they don't necessarily enforce a lot of these pieces of legislation. They certainly don't impose a lot of these new pieces of legislation. And so that sort of understanding, I think, is well known amongst the folks who work in financial services. So from that point, I do think we are affected in that way. Outside of that, I think the U.S. largely operates for like the Bahamas. A lot of people say, whether the PLP or the FNM in power, there's certain things that tend to be true. And so I think largely for U.S. foreign policy outside of that, there's very little change or difference between Democratic presidents and Republican presidents as it relates to the Bahamas. We are a strong ally of the United States. That doesn't change. We're heavily dependent in terms of, finances, foreign direct investment from the United States. They're heavily supportive of the Bahamas in that way. That doesn't change. And it has a lot to do with the fact that we're sitting right at their southern border. And so they tend to want to have a good relationship with the Bahamas, want to make sure that the Bahamas is a stable country, because again, things that happen on the borders of their country, as you see in Mexico, affects them. And so largely speaking, I would say in terms of my experience, outside of that sort of sector of society, there's very little change in the way the United States deals with the Bahamas and the Bahamas deals with the United States, whether there's a Republican or a Democratic president.
Peter, let me get your thoughts on that question.
Well, I'll be diplomatic in my speech as I live here, and I try my best to acknowledge the nuanced reality that is international relations, especially when we're arguing from a smaller position, the underdog in this case. But I will levy, I do agree with all of Barry Griffin's points, because he's not speaking in capacity as a senator, of course. I wanted to emphasize Barry Griffin's points. But also, I would also open up the way that America deals diplomatically with the Bahamas in particular. We've seen a lot of foreign direct investment, as we've also noted, from the United States, insofar as I think that they donated a fleet of cars to our police force. Thanks. We've also seen foreign direct investment from China, and the different ways of which they have built public goods and investment into quality of life for Bahamian citizens in many different ways. We could point to a lot of different structures that have been built, not only for us, but of course in places like Jamaica, the Belt and Road Initiative, as well as foreign direct investment in Africa. Depending on how you gauge that, it seems as though that there's a different way of which these things are weighed in, the way that foreign direct investment manifests in the Caribbean or in these different places, depending on who is doling it out, whether it be the diplomatic services of the United States or people like China or people like Canada. I would ask the Bahamian public, what do you see reflected more so in your own quality of life? We now have a lot of fancy, big police trucks, the Ford ones. I know they use their sirens and they cause me to pull on the side of the road. I am very aware, and I see the manifestation of American foreign direct investment. I also have seen the Chinese foreign direct investment. I've taken a lot of pleasure in some of the structures that they've built. I've seen Bahamians at large reap benefits, whether it be jobs or delectation with their families on their outings and whatnot in those very structures. And I wonder, which ones do we value and which ones manifest in a better Bahamas versus a Bahamas where we just have a U.S. embassy that dwarfs the majority of downtown and looks down upon, the buildings that we have.
Got that. Thank you so much.
I would want to just comment on that as well, in terms of foreign direct investment. and what we get. I think we're speaking now from the US and other countries. And so in countries like China that tend to be a little bit more centralized in their power and their economy, foreign direct investment comes in the form of investment from the government. However, the United States is a little bit more private sector focused. And so when I say foreign direct investment from the US, I also include all of the investment that comes from the US private sector, because the US tends to work through its private companies. And so the United States government itself may not be building a mega hotel or building a sports facility. However, they encourage investors to invest in the Bahamas, continue to give Bahamas certain ratings that allows American investors to have more confidence in putting their money in the Bahamas. And so every single American resident, foreign resident that comes to the Bahamas and buys a second home and moves to the Bahamas, that's foreign direct investment. Every American that opens up a company and does business in the Bahamas, that's foreign direct investment. The villas and other properties that, are sprouted around the country to support tourism, that's foreign direct investment. And so I also want us to consider that as well, that, that also comes from the relationship with the United States, because that exact same relationship does not exist even for our fellow countrymen in the Caribbean. The United States does not push that sort of level of investment, or other Caribbean countries that are very close to the US doesn't have that same level of investment from the United States or China. And so I think that speaks to the way the Bahamas deals diplomatically with our economic policy and our social policies with these countries. But just to sort of give that larger context, for me, when I speak of American support of our economy, or Chinese, or whoever we're speaking about, that's the full context. And again, between Democratic presidents or Republican presidents, I still see, at least from where I sit, I still see that same level of engagement and investment with the Bahamas. I don't think that changes, because someone often made this joke. I think it was a former Secretary of State in the United States who used to come to the Bahamas quite frequently because they had a second home. I won't call any names, but they often remarked to Bahamians that, we got to make sure the Bahamas is good, because no matter if, Republicans or Democrats are in power, we all leave Washington and New York and come to our second homes in the Bahamas for vacation. And so again, we have to sort of look at the context of our relationship with the United States. We are their backyard. We are their playground. And so whether you're Democrat or Republican, the lawmakers, the businessmen, the billionaires, they all use the Bahamas as their playground. And so in that sense, the relationship largely doesn't change whether it's a Republican or a Democrat.
And in essence, basically everybody benefits from the Bahamas. Sorry, everybody benefits no matter which party is in. Now, Peter, I gotta wrap up. But I will allow you 15 seconds.
Oh no, I just wanted to re-echo. I don't think we disagree, Senator. I also don't think that we disagree insofar as that a lot of these second homes are taking up valuable space, and also the fact that we're levying off at a price point the different properties of which, in the middle of a housing crisis for a lot of Bahamians that could barely afford rent in these different places, and the contestment of crown land and whatnot, is also something to add to that context. But I definitely don't think we disagree there. I think that regardless of the partisan, it is imperative to both parties that we have an amicable diplomatic relationship.
Agreed. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here with us today. I really appreciate it, and we appreciate it here on Our News. We are continuing our election coverage. We are just hours away from finding out, or maybe even a day, who is the president-elect of the free world. Our Candino Knowles is in Florida, giving you minute-by-minute coverage. You can follow us on all your social media platforms or tune into Our News right now. Thank you for joining us. My name is Danielle Miller.